A Sunday night last March, two cars raced through Moss Side near Manchester city centre. In an exchange of gunfire, a man is shot. This is the second car chase of the weekend and the third shooting. Police set up a special operation to investigate, but despite the seizure of many firearms, the shooting goes on. Hard drugs and big money have brought gunfire to Manchester streets.
If you're into drugs hard, selling drugs hard, you can make £1 a day, no problem. The reason why there's a lot of guns out there is because there's a lot of money out there, you know. They just take it to spend on things that they think should go with money. Violence, fast cars and guns.
If we're going down that slippery slope where people are carrying more weapons and are prepared to use them, that is very, very worrying indeed for all of us.
In the newspaper stories, the city sounds like Chicago, but to those involved, the shootings are all too close to home. It's almost 3 years since Tony Gardner was shot dead. To his family, the killing still appears without motive.
I was told the killer was there awaiting the arrival of the car. My question is, how did the killer know my son was in that car? And as the car arrived, the killer just passed the car once, I was told, turned back, immediately turned back, shot my son.
Tony Gardner was 26 and the father of 2. He'd been brought up in a God-fearing household. The night he died, he'd been at a service at his local church. His sister still heads the choir, and his father and mother lead the congregation.
They have taken a great part of us away. Sometimes we sit down and we cry and we groan. Thank God that we know the Lord. He helped us over it so many times. Had not been for him, I don't think we would be here, any of us, today.
Probably if he had died a natural death, probably I would learn to accept it. But the way in which he was killed, I cannot understand why, who did it, and why, till this day.
After Tony was killed, his parents discovered he'd led another life, of which they knew nothing.
After his death, I begin to hear that he used to pinch things, which during his lifetime, nobody tells me this. I don't know. We don't know about it. I don't think I could overrule these things, what people is saying. We live two different lives. The life they live outside their home and on the street, we don't know. The police said he was caught pinching things. I have no proof to deny that. But even if that is so, I don't think he deserved the kind of death that he got. I don't think so.
Hendy Proverbs was 25. Last year, he was shot dead in his local pub in Hume, caught up in someone else's argument.
Hendy was sat in the pub having a drink at lunchtime. A lad came into the pub, spoke to him, said a couple of words, walked out again, and came back, and a couple of minutes later drew a sawn-off shotgun and shot him. It was just total cold-blooded murder. By the time my mum had got there, Hendy was already dead.
There's no hope, there's no future. Our generation before, if it's an argument, you just fight, you know, with your hand. But this generation now, they don't even want to use a knife, never mind fight with the hands. They're just using a gun. They just want to use the gun.
The shots that killed Hendy Proverbs and Tony Gardner were just two of the many to be heard around Manchester in the past 4 years. There is no common explanation, no simple gang war. What is clear in those parts of the city dominated by drugs is a ready availability of firearms and a willingness to use them.
Every morning or sometimes you may wake up and you hear that there has been a shooting, there has been some upheaval within the area. I have a burden on my heart for young people growing up in Moss Side today. I see the future for them as very bleak. With what's happening in the area at this time, they don't seem to have a chance.
The kids who come to Charlie Moore's youth club are from that vast majority in Moss Side who don't get into trouble and who just want a decent job. But in the 20 years it's been going, the club's youth workers have seen the pressures get tougher on all the kids.
A lot of young people get involved in drugs. I think at times it touches many of the households in the area, and the drug scene maintains that household. It's a very lucrative business. People can get flash cars, they can get the latest gear, and they can get things they want. And so that's something they aspire to. They have got to survive, and they will survive one way or the other, whether legally or illegally. And that is the sum total of, would be the sum total of their existence for the future.
Moss Side has become the drug centre for the Northwest. There's open selling both in the precinct and in the streets surrounding it. It's a sophisticated setup. The dealers use cell phones to reach their customers. And mountain bikes carry the drugs to and from safe houses. Once only soft drugs like marijuana were dealt openly. Now it's heroin and cocaine. The new generation of dealers has few scruples, but like many speaking tonight, they do fear reprisals. For that reason, we have had to conceal some identities.
I don't feel bad about selling drugs because I didn't ask you to come and buy my drugs. You approached me to buy my drugs. And if you're too young, you get sent away. If you're pregnant, you get cussed and sent away. And that's it. I'll sell to your granny, I don't care who else. I don't ask nobody to come and buy my drugs. You know what it does to you, and that's why I ain't taking it. I'm not daft. I mean, the difference between my dad's generation and my generation is that we don't see it as right that you should work the whole of your life in one place, and at the end of the day, you've still got little or nothing to show for it. I mean, my dad works hard, man. You know, I just remember seeing him come home and straight after work dropping asleep. Sometimes couldn't even wait for my mum to bring him his tea. And then the next morning, up at 6 to being at work at 7, to do that again. And for years and years and years. I've been seeing him do that for 20 years. And I'm not going to do that.
For young men on the make, cocaine and heroin can bring big money, fast.
If you're into drugs hard, selling drugs hard, you can make $1,000 a day, no problem. Drugs is the economy on my side, man. Serious. I mean, there's so many offshoots. You've got, like, people who've set themselves up out of drug money. They've made enough money out of drugs, and they've gone legal and set themselves up, doing good. Give them a chance to do things, right? Half of them guys out there could be top businessmen. I mean, they've got business minds. Selling drugs is a business, you know what I mean? It's not like messing about or doing anything else. Selling drugs is a business.
But it's a dangerous business. One man's profit can easily become another man's pickings. Many dealers now protect themselves with guns.
There's a hell of a lot of trigger-happy people about the place, don't they? Whereas guns is concerned. I mean, it's not unusual to just walk on the front line and see a man with a gun. It's not unusual now. The American scene is now hitting here. You know what I mean? And people are trying to run away from this. You know, yeah, I've heard so many people say, no, it can't get here, and it's already here. They're not interested in physical violence, you know what I mean, one-on-to-one. They're coming to damage you.
What the dealers fear most is what they call being taxed. But it's not the Inland Revenue who are after their money.
Taxing goes like this. People sell drugs, yeah? And some make more money than others. You know what I mean? And some make a lot of money. Now, you can't put all this money legally away, sort of thing. So now, you know, you'll have a stash house or you'll keep some in your house or whatever. Now, people are watching to see how many punters you serve a day. They'll sort of like set you up, wait until you come home and you're in your house, burst in your house all masked up, tooled up sort of like, and just basically put a piece to your head and say, where's your money? And you've got to give it to them. So if you want to be involved in the drugs business on a violent level, then you'll suspect or you'll feel like you need a gun because your next adversary's got a gun, your enemy's got a gun. So therefore, you feel as though you've got to have a gun just to protect yourself.
Some of the shootings in the past 4 years, then, reflect the growth in Moss Side dealers taxing each other. But the firearms they've acquired for protection may also have been used in an even longer-running feud. Cheetham Hill lies on the opposite side of Manchester from Moss Side, but the two have close ties. Many now living in Cheetham moved there when the old Moss Side slums were demolished. 10 years later, when redevelopment came northwards, there was a reverse migration from the terraces of Cheetham down to Moss Side. A generation has grown up with friends and enemies, living in camps on both sides of the city.
With the Cheetham Hill and Moss Side businessing, well, that's like, there is some rivalry and gangster war business between them in a sense. There is a feud between them. But it's not like everybody is involved. I mean, people from Cheetham Hill still go to Moss Side and vice versa. To be honest, the whole of the crew of Moss Side that's carrying a grudge against Cheetham Hill to those that are actually fighting. If anything, there's about 6 actual hardcore guys are at war with Cheetham Hill. And they've got a calling crew of about 20 to get involved and so on and so forth. And the Cheetham Hill side, they have more that appear to be involved because they're tighter-knit. But apart from that, all in all, it's to do with about 5 people, basically. And that's how it all started.
This is one of the places where it started. From the mid-80s, Manchester city centre and its clubs became a focal point for the rivalries of Cheetham Hill and Moss Side. The gallery took the brunt of it. Today it's closed. The feud started over women, but quickly became about reputation. While Moss Side's notoriety came from drugs, a Cheetham Hill gang spent the 1980s carving out a name for violence, especially armed robbery.
Them boys up there are sort of like known for security vans, blags, you know, stuff like that. And always have had shooters and stuff. I mean, that's how they made their name and their money and their reputation, so to speak. So, I mean, obviously, they're sort of like violent.
It started with a supermarket raid in 1981. No one was charged, but Cheetham Hill privately took the credit. Last month, their violence became public with the conviction of 2 men for armed robbery in Oldham. Stephen Julian and Chinadu Iraguara attacked 2 security guards with a shotgun and a machete. They jointly got 42 years, but while close to the heart of the Cheetham Hill gang, they were not the leaders. Cheetham Hill is tiny compared to Moss Side, only a quarter of a mile square, but that compactness has given its criminals a degree of organisation that their rivals don't possess.
Them hillbillies, they just organise themselves like an army, really, you know what I mean? They've got the soldiers and the lieutenants and this and that. That's how they sort of like name themselves. Whereas people in Moss Side, they're not really interested in gang warfare because drugs has always been the way of life in Moss Side.
But Cheetham Hill may be starting to extend their interests across the city. They now have links with other gangs, both black and white, in Longsight, Salford and Wythenshawe.
Cheetham Hill does certainly seem a lot more organised because they seem to have formed alliances with Longsight and Salford, and they seem to move as one. Whereas in Moss Side, it's little groups of people who protect their own patch and don't look after anyone else. In that sense, Cheetham Hill seems more organised, whereas Moss Side aren't. At some point, there'll be a struggle for power, a struggle for turf. Longsight, Cheetah Mill, Wythenshawe, Salford are pushing for power. And to be seen to be weak is to be at a disadvantage.
Once again, it may be the night spots of Manchester that first feel the gangs flex their muscles. People are reluctant to talk openly, but doormen, customers and club owners all tell the same story.
We've been threatened twice. If you don't let us in, we're going to burn your club down, we're going to blow your legs off, wherever. The Cheetham will seem to have a notorious name, gangland-wide, with instigating troubling clubs and on doors.
These guys walk in as and when they like. On one occasion, I was at a club and someone kicked the door off, and 17 or 18 people just walked in front of all the bouncers that were there. I turned to a guy and I said, "What the hell's going on?" And he said, well, he just turned to me and he said, "Salford."
In Manchester, it's far, far greater than people realise. There's about 5 or 6 or even 7 nightclubs which have been threatened. They take the door like they'll put their own men on the door, and whatever comes through that door, they get a percentage of or take the old take.
As I hear it, they try and sort of like control a door and a percentage of the bar, otherwise we'll do this and that or whatever, blah, blah. Because Cheetham Mill like to live that life, don't they? I mean, they're gangsters and that. I suppose that's how they go on.
There's certainly certain clubs in the city centre who have been targeted. I know of one club that was turned over twice within the space of 3 or 4 weeks. The first time for about 14 grand, second time for 3 or 4, by people who the club owners actually knew. And it was rumoured that after the second time the place was turned over, the guys who did the job were seen ordering champagne, drinking champagne, and basically blowing the money that they just ripped off from this club at another night spot in Manchester. Longsight, Cheetham Mill, Wythenshawe, Salford are pushing for power, and to be seen to be weak is to be at a disadvantage.
Until now, Moss Side's strength has been the scale of its drugs trade. It hasn't got a monopoly in the northwest, but nowhere else has such a thriving street business. Despite high-profile police operations, the problem remains.
They ain't getting down into this thing. They don't know nothing, really. The police will tell you that they've cleaned up this, they've cleaned up... They ain't cleaned up shit. You know what I mean? This is something that's here, right? And it's just going to escalate. It's not going to go on.
For the police, the drugs trade is a fact of life. Their response is to contain and control the problem, rather than displace it elsewhere.
It is very much a containment exercise. I don't suppose at the end of the day we're ever going to stop it completely. However, we continue to do our very, very best in that direction. People do get arrested, drugs are recovered, and we will continue in that vein.
But many Moss Side people press for still tougher action.
The whole point about the drugs problem is that the drugs problem isn't really a Moss Side problem. It's a problem that the rest of the northwest has, but which they locate into the Moss Side area. It does concern me when people say that the police are happy to keep the issue locked into this one area, because I'm sure in my own mind that if drugs were being dealt in the more prosperous areas of Greater Manchester, that there would have been a much greater public demand that the thing was cracked down on.
It's a concern that's also shared by black people in Moss Side.
I've been surprised at the police response. And it's certainly the case where white people see these guys breaking the law, and they say the police aren't doing anything about it. Why should they get away with it when we can't? And it fuels the resentment that there is between black and white communities. The police have sat back and let this happen. They've known the consequences, but I suppose it's a gamble they've been prepared to take.
But how high the stakes are now became apparent in February of this year, when the drug squad did act in Operation Popeye. As the London train pulled in at Manchester's Piccadilly station, 2 Moss Side men were on board. Their luggage contained nearly 1.5 kilos of heroin, worth £250,000. Ian McIntosh and Maurice McPherson were working for a supplier with a near monopoly of heroin in Moss Side. Their arrest led to a brief famine of the drug. but it also triggered a threefold increase in reported shootings. McPherson in particular was a strong man, feared by Cheetham Hill. With him gone, there were many who wanted either to settle old scores or to fill the drugs vacuum. Cheetham Hill wasted little time in taking their grudges south through the city. At the International 2 Club in Longside, a reggae night came to a violent end when 10 men burst in waving pistols. There was an exchange of fire. One man was shot in the back, but managed to escape. That weekend, it seemed that gun law had come to South Manchester. There were car chases on both Saturday and Sunday. Guns were fired on both nights. A second man was shot. On Monday, the police mounted Operation Takeover to investigate the shootings. This is the man who was shot at the International 2 Club. For Delroy Brown, this was the 4th time he'd been attacked. It wasn't to be the last. In May, gangs from Cheetham Hill appeared in Moss Side twice in broad daylight, at the annual carnival and at a Bob Marley concert. Bystanders were left in no doubt they were carrying guns.
And this was a hot day, remember? And all the front line had on long macs or ski jackets. It means like they're carrying.
These guys were walking around with their hands inside their coats, and that was really scary. That was really, really scary. They were armed.
That was just a blatant show of strength, man, you know what I mean? They just wanted, well, it was like intimidating people, wanting people to know how strong they were.
There was a lot of people rushing around, not knowing what was going on, people screaming. And then I don't know where they came from, but I heard 2 shots. It didn't look as though they found the person they were looking for, but they certainly found his car.
The BMW was a write-off. Once again, it belonged to Delroy Brown. Despite a 3-month investigation, the police have been unable to discover the identity of his attackers. But their raids in Cheetham Hill and Moss Side found more than a dozen different weapons.
These are just some of the weapons that we recovered during the course of our operation. This rather nasty-looking weapon here is a Walther PPK, which was in the possession of a 16-year-old boy, along with suitable ammunition for it. This one is a Smith & Wesson 38 revolver, another dreadful-looking object. And this one, a pump-action shotgun, which is extremely nasty, to say the least. To have that pointed at you would be terrifying, I would have thought. But if that's a sample of what we've recovered this year, which is obviously what it is, it really is quite frightening to think how many weapons might be about.
In fact, Operation Takeover seems to have found only a fraction of the guns on the street.
The reason why there's a lot of guns out there is because there's a lot of money out there now. Young guys got a lot of money, you know, and they just take it to spend on things that they think should go with money. Violence and fast cars and guns.
Well, I've asked a guy before how easily it would be to get hold of a gun. And he says, well, how much you willing to spend? And I says, well, what could I have? What prices do they start from? And he said, well, you could pick up a handgun for about 50 quid.
You've just got to know where to go, where to get it. You can get any gun you like as long as you've got the money to pay for it. Any gun you like. Brand new, wrapped up in the box, in the paper, brand new, in the greaseproof paper, man. Smith & Wessons, Magnums, through to Uzis. You know what I mean? I personally have seen 2 Uzis.
This is the Uzi, an Israeli-built 9mm submachine gun with a firepower of 600 rounds a minute. If these are to be had, the outlook is bleak.
I've seen 2 Uzis myself, with the fold-over handles, the stamps, the greasy-looking barrels and all that. I've seen 2 brand-new-looking Uzis on this guy's table. I know what an Uzi looks like from magazines, and I've seen them on TV. And then by, like, the whole shape of the gun, really, you just recognize it like you'd recognize an escort. But there was one thing that was distinctive. The barrels are big. They're not small barrels. They're big barrels that are like, you know, 3 fire at a time sort of thing. Close sequence.
But there's a possibility that there will be more killings. I mean, you cannot guarantee that there won't be more. Differences will occur. Other people will try to muscle in, and then those people will have to defend their patch or whatever. and there's a likelihood that there will be other shootings.
The shootings and violence have continued throughout this year. Some may be down to drugs or gangs, but more seem motiveless, their victims the targets of casual brutality. Hendy Proverbs died on the floor of a pub in a pointless argument over a broken table lamp.
Obviously the body was still there, and there was, not surprisingly, a lot of blood about. And it was a dreadful scene, to say the least. But I was very disturbed to see also a number of customers who'd been in the premises at the relevant time, still there, some of whom were playing pool, and some of whom were simply carrying on drinking. There's very little regard, seemingly, on some people's part, for life.
It's this indifference to suffering that shocks the victims' families. Tony Gardner's killer is still at large, the motive unknown. His parents now recognise the dangerous world in which their son had chosen to live.
It frightens me because I've got other children out there. Someone out there knows who killed Tony. And I just hope and trust that that someone will don't have to really say who they are. Just pick up the phone and call somebody and just disclose that secret they have carried for nearly 3 years. I wouldn't like nobody to go through what we have gone through and still going through. Nobody, no matter how bad they are, I would never love anybody to go through it. We're suffering.